There's something troubling happening in Guinea-Bissau right now. At about 1 p.m. on November 26, 2025, the presidential palace in Bissau looks ordinary. Inside, President Umaro Sissoco Embaló sits behind his desk. Outside, the capital hums with the familiar sounds of motorcycle taxis, street vendors, and afternoon heat. Then, the gunfire begins. Automatic weapons fire erupts across the city. At 3 locations at once: the Presidential Palace, the National Electoral Commission headquarters, and the Interior Ministry. A coordinated strike, timed down to the minute. Moments later, soldiers loyal to Brigadier General Denis N'Canha move into the presidential compound. The guards stationed to defend the president don't resist, they simply step aside. Many of them have switched allegiance already. There is no shootout, no last stand. President Embaló is arrested in his office without a struggle. A silent, almost clinical military operation. Within hours, the capital falls under total lockdown. Roadblocks appear at major intersections. Armored vehicles take positions at ministries, major roads, and the airport. And at army headquarters, the man behind it all, General Denis N'Canha, the officer responsible for protecting the president, appears on state TV, flanked by armed soldiers. He announces a takeover by the High Military Command for the restoration of national security and public order. The list of arrests quickly reveals the true scale of the operation. The new military leaders detains President Embaló, his armed forces chief, General N'Canha, his deputy general, Mamadou Touré, Interior Minister Boche Kande. Then the military does something unusual. It arrests opposition figures as well. Fernando Diaz, the presidential candidate who claimed victory 3 days earlier, is taken from his home to the Air Force base. Former Prime Minister Domingos Simões Pereira, who supported Diaz, is detained too. They aren't picking a side. They are wiping the entire political chessboard clean. By nightfall, borders are closed, media broadcasts suspended, curfew imposed, and the electoral process, one that was supposed to define Guinea-Bissau's future, is abruptly shut down. A country of 1.9 million people has just experienced its 5th successful coup since independence. But to understand why this happened, we need to go back 3 days.
Instaurado pela alta chefia de diferentes ramos das Forças Armadas, o Alto Comando Militar para a Restauração de Segurança Nacional e Ordem Pública acaba de assumir plenitude dos poderes do Estado da República da Guiné-Bissau.
November 23, 2025, Election Day. Guinea-Bissau holds presidential and legislative elections. The country is deeply fractured. The African Party for the Independence of Guinea and Cape Verde, the party that fought for independence and has been part of every election since 1974, is not even on the ballot. For the first time in the nation's history, they have been excluded. The Supreme Court had disqualified the PAIGC-led coalition in September for late paperwork. In October, it barred Domingos Simões Pereira, one of the country's most influential politicians, from even running in this presidential election. Opposition groups accused Embaló of using the courts to eliminate threats to his re-election. With PAIGC sidelined, a relatively unknown candidate emerges, Fernando Diaz da Costa, former vice president of the National People's Assembly. He receives PAIGC's endorsement, which boosts his campaign, but he lacks the party infrastructure. So on November 23rd, people vote, but the real explosion comes the next day, November 24, 2025. 1 day before official results are due, Fernando Diaz appears before supporters in Bissau, declaring victory in the presidential election. He claims his campaign has obtained an advantage in almost all regions. Hours later, Embaló's campaign spokesperson, Oscar Barbaso, makes an identical statement. They've won, no runoff needed. Both candidates declare victory before the National Electoral Commission announces anything. Both claim they have the real results. Both position themselves to reject whatever the commission says if it doesn't favor them. This creates a constitutional deadlock. No matter what the official results show, half the country will reject them as fraudulent. The stage is set for post-election violence, contested legitimacy, and political paralysis. The likelihood of violence skyrockets. Guinea-Bissau stands on a knife edge. and the military is watching all of it unfold. 2 days later, they intervene.
O Alto Comando Militar para a Restauração de Segurança Nacional e Ordem Pública decide depor imediatamente o Presidente da República, encerrar até a novas ordens todas as instituições da República da Guiné-Bissau.
When General N'Canha addresses the nation after the coup, he cites a dramatic justification. Quote, "We have uncovered a plan to destabilize the country involving national drug lords. Weapons were introduced into the country to alter the constitutional order." On paper, the claim is believable. Guinea-Bissau, you see, is known globally as a major cocaine transit hub, a place where South American drug cartels funnel shipments toward Europe. In fact, in 2024, US court documents showed that political elites, including Bakai Sanha Jr., son of a former president, were financing coup plots with cocaine profits. So yes, drugs and coups in Guinea-Bissau are deeply connected. But there's a twist here. Earlier in 2025, President Umbaro's government extradited 4 major drug traffickers to the United States. In 2024, security forces seized 2.6 tons of cocaine, one of the largest hauls in West African history. Umaro publicly declared, quote, "Guinea-Bissau is no longer a narco state," and strengthened cooperation with US agencies like the DEA. For drug networks and military officers tied to them, this move threatened powerful interest. So, when the military says they acted because of drug traffickers, the question becomes, is the military stopping drug lords or defending them? Or were they simply using the drug narrative to justify removing a president who had already lost political legitimacy? These are the questions we have to answer in the coming days. But before that, there is an important pattern in the history of Guinea-Bissau that will help us understand what is really happening right now. You see, since independence in 1974, Guinea-Bissau has experienced 5 successful coups, 17 attempted or alleged plots, 1 major civil war, multiple political assassinations, which brings, on average, at least 1 coup every 3 years. The reason goes back to the country's origin story. Guinea-Bissau gained independence through armed struggle. The military didn't just fight for the nation. They conceived themselves as the rightful guardians of it. Civilian institutions never developed enough strength to challenge that belief. So, you see, Guinea-Bissau isn't occasionally unstable. It is structurally unstable. Military intervention isn't the exception here. It is the routine way politics works in this country. And here's the thing about President Umaro. He was supposed to break this pattern. He came from outside the traditional PAIGC establishment. He ran as a reformer. But look at his origin story. 2019, Umaro runs for president after breaking with PAIGC. He becomes the candidate of Madam G15, a breakaway party. He faces PAIGC's Domingos Simões Pereira in a runoff election. The results are contested. The Supreme Court doesn't certify them. Parliament doesn't approve his inauguration. So, Umaro organizes an alternative swearing-in ceremony at a hotel in Bissau. Several politicians accuse him of staging a coup d'etat, but outgoing President Mario Vaz steps aside anyway, and Umaro becomes president. Though he never fully resolves the legitimacy questions. Once in power, he governs through confrontation. When Parliament opposes him, he dissolves it. When the Supreme Court challenges him, he questions its authority. When PAIGC wins election in June 2023, he finds way to sideline them. When ECOWAS tries to mediate, he threatens to expel their delegation. By 2025, opposition figures are calling him an autocrat conducting a constitutional coup. And they are not entirely wrong here. Umaro, you see, was systematically dismantling checks on his power. But here's the paradox. In trying to prevent military interference by consolidating presidential authority, he destroyed the civilian institutions that could have constrained the military. When the army moved on November 26th, there was no functioning parliament to resist, no independent judiciary, no political parties with legitimacy. no constitutional order worth defending. Embaló had removed all the obstacles to his own power, and in so doing, he removed all the obstacles to the military's power too. But there's one question we must tackle here. Are there external players involved in this coup? Every coup you see has local causes, but coups also create opportunities for external actors. So who benefits from Guinea-Bissau's instability? Well, let's start with the usual suspect everyone loves to point fingers at: Russia. President Umaro cultivated close ties with Moscow. He traveled to Russia multiple times at Vladimir Putin's invitation. In February 2025, just 9 months before this coup, Umaro made a historic state visit. He became the first Guinea-Bissau's president ever to meet with a Russian leader at the Kremlin. The discussions covered mining resources, infrastructure, energy, and security cooperation. Russian aluminium giant Rusal was exploring bauxite deposits in Guinea-Bissau. In December 2024, the company awarded 70 scholarships to Bissau Guineans to study in Moscow. Throughout 2024, the two countries deepened cooperation in oil exploration and bauxite mining. And the timing of Umbaro's February Moscow visit is quite telling. He departed the day before the opposition planned a nationwide strike protesting that his mandate had expired. So, did Russia orchestrate the coup? Well, probably not. And here is why. Umaro was caught in Moscow. He was favorable to Russian interests. If Russia wanted influence in Guinea-Bissau, they already had it through Umaro. The coup removed a leader who was already aligned with them. More importantly, there is no evidence of Russian mercenaries in Guinea-Bissau. Russia's engagement appears primarily economic. They want bauxite and offshore oil opportunities. That requires stability and a government that honors contracts. Coups create uncertainty about deal validity. Russia didn't orchestrate this coup, at least we don't have any evidence to support that. But they will certainly try to engage with whoever emerges from it. That is the pattern. Russia offers security assistance to military governments facing isolation. If ECOWAS decides to suspend Guinea-Bissau and impose sanctions, Moscow may present itself as an alternative partner. But what about Portugal? Portugal is the former colonial power here. They maintain cultural and economic ties. Portuguese is still the official language. Many Bissau Guineans hold Portuguese citizenship. You would think Lisbon would have significant influence, but relations deteriorated sharply before the coup. On August 15, 2025, the Umaro government expelled journalists from major Portuguese language news organizations, state news agency Lusa, and broadcasters RTP Africa and RDP Africa. They were ordered to leave by August 19. No official explanation was provided. Portugal's foreign ministry condemned the action as highly reprehensible and unjustifiable and summoned Guinea-Bissau's ambassador. In fact, the Committee to Protect Journalists called it part of the government's hostility to the media. So, did Portugal have a hand in this coup? There is no credible evidence tying the Portuguese to the president's removal as at when recording this video. So, what about the United States? US engagement with Guinea-Bissau focuses almost entirely on one issue, that is drug trafficking. The DEA has been conducting operations there for years. In 2013, they executed a dramatic arrest of Jose Americo Bobonachuto, a former Navy chief on international waters. He was convicted of cocaine trafficking. The April 2025 extraditions represented unprecedented cooperation. 4 major traffickers sent to American prisons. Umaro publicly committed to surrender even Bissau Guinean citizens with warrants. From Washington's perspective, they were working with a cooperating partner. So this coup removed that partner and created instability that hampers counter-narcotics work. It appears the US has no strategic interest in Guinea-Bissau beyond the war on drug trafficking. There are no military bases that we know of, no significant mineral resources America needs, no major trade relationship that we know of at this time. They were already getting what they wanted from Umaro. Although Umbaro's visit to Moscow in recent months could be seen as getting too close to a rival power, and we all know what happens to African leaders getting close to Moscow. That is not saying we know anything for a fact there. So, if not Russia, Portugal, or the United States, then who? The answer might be no external government at all. The real foreign influence in Guinea-Bissau doesn't come from embassies or military advisors. It comes from transnational criminal organizations. Latin America cocaine cartels use Guinea-Bissau as a gateway to European markets. The Italian cartel has documented connections. Colombian and Venezuelan trafficking organizations operate there. These networks don't influence politics through diplomacy. They influence it through corruption. Cartel representatives pay military officers for protection. They fund political campaigns through shell companies. They use Bissau Guineans with dual citizenship to move money and drugs, and they create parallel power structures that compete with the state itself. So when this general mentioned foreign nationals involved in the destabilization plot, he might have been referring to cartel operatives, or he might have been providing a convenient excuse. Either way, the drug networks are the most significant foreign influence in Guinea-Bissau. And this is not because they orchestrated the coup, but because they have created a system where military officers have financial incentives to maintain instability. So, who actually benefits from this coup? Well, the military officers who now control state power. They have direct access to government resources, control over customs and ports, the ability to negotiate new patronage arrangements, including with drug traffickers. And there are also drug trafficking networks that benefit from weakened oversight and the potential to strike new protection deals with the military government desperate for revenue. But who loses in all of this? The 1.9 million people of Guinea-Bissau, foreign investors facing contract uncertainty, ECOWAS remaining credibility, and the broader project of democratic governance in West Africa. So, what comes next? This is a developing story, and we'll keep you updated as the situation unravels. Make sure to subscribe and let me know what you think.